Hello, thank you for joining us here at Community Dialogue. I'm your host, Heather Stevens, and today we're going to talk about COVID-19 and the impact it has had on students and educators. When shelter-at-home ordinances went into effect to slow the spread of COVID-19, education had to make the transition from in-person to virtual. While we have seen a transition back into the classroom setting in recent months, there are still some lingering effects of COVID-19 being felt, from reduced class sizes to students choosing to remain in a virtual setting. To help us try to further understand the effect that COVID-19 has had on education, we will talk with students and faculty who will share their experiences. With us now are CSM students Gabriel Salm and Gieske. Thank you all for joining us today. A study recently published in the Journal of Medical Internet Research found that 71% of college students reported an increase of stress and anxiety, as well as 89% reported difficulty concentrating on their education due to fear about both themselves and their loved ones' health. Amber, I'd like to start with you. During the pandemic, did you feel heightened levels of stress and anxiety?
I think especially at the beginning, there was more fear of the risk of being infected or coming into contact with people, and there was a lot of stress surrounding that because, you know, in your day-to-day, you end up going into so many places and out of so many places and interacting with people. I mean, obviously, with the reduced operation of businesses and everything, that was kind of eschewed, but it was very stressful at the beginning. I think also with not being able to come into contact with other students and everything, it made it hard to learn for me because I'm a very social person naturally, and I like having that discussionary aspect of lessons, and over Zoom or in a fully online format, you can't really have that in a natural way. So I think that diminished my enthusiasm for class, as well as the overall stress of trying to get all of that knowledge into my brain kind of by myself.
And Gabriel, how about you?
I definitely found that COVID brought new anxieties into my life by how Amber said, there was a lot of different changes in as businesses closed, and a lot that there was to be adapted to, and for I think not only me but a large majority of people, getting used to that change wasn't as easy as I think how a lot of people had hoped it would be.
And how did your stress and anxiety in the pandemic correlate to your experiences with virtual learning?
I actually found it to be a bit helpful in a way that I think it improved my communication skills in an area which I don't think I really had any experience in. So I did find that kind of, in a way, a useful tool, something new to learn. And yeah.
And Amber, how about you? Did you notice a relation between your stress and anxiety levels and your experience with virtual learning?
I think, oddly enough, it made me really aware of how I sit and how I eat and all the things that you don't normally do on camera and that you're just doing during class because that's how your day is going and you're stuck there for hours on end. I think it didn't quite boost my stress, but it made me really aware of how I looked and how I was acting. It made me really self-conscious at the beginning, and I mean still a little self-conscious even now when I turn on the camera to go onto a Zoom. I'm always checking my hair and trying to look okay. And I mean, for some people that's they're used to it and that's fine. I think there's still just a little bit of nervous every time you get onto a Zoom and you're like, am I doing this right? Is my mic on? It's we've gotten used to it, but it's still a little grates you a little bit.
So did you experience any difficulties with virtual learning?
I think especially my first semester here, I had a fully online class for the first time, and having that in my first semester without jumping into that is in my first week of college was wild, because I had never had a class where I had no interaction, and it's just, here's the book, go ahead and learn. And like, oh man, whew, that was a rough week. But I think beyond like getting over the hill of getting used to it, I think now I'm okay with being able to, I've developed strategies to help myself like teach it to me rather than looking at it like, oh my gosh, there's so many things due. So it's become easier, but it's still hard to attack a class that's fully virtual without a Zoom or even with a Zoom.
Gabriel, how about you? What would you say was your hardest part with virtual learning?
I agree. There was a lot of anxiety behind just getting on camera and talking with people virtually. It wasn't something I was used to, and anytime I got on, I thought the same thing, like, is my hair okay? How are these other people that I'm talking to gonna be on Zoom? And it kind of left you at the edge of a cliff in a way, because you never really knew, and you never really knew like what's expected. So it was sort of this behavior you had to learn.
Now, according to the National Library of Medicine, 71.5% of students reported difficulty learning virtually, while 58.2% said they would never take online courses in the future. Gabriel, given the choice, would you take online courses again?
I think it depends on the class, but yes, I would. Again, I think that it did help my communication skills because I think the world is modernizing, and there's a lot of potential in technology. I actually did really enjoy the virtual learning for a while for the classes that I had. I'm not big on interaction with large groups of people, so it definitely also kind of cured my anxiety because I had that comfort of being home in my own personal space. So yeah.
Amber, how about you?
I think for the labs especially, because I'm an environmental science major, I wish I could have been in person and created projects with people like live and right there. That also ties into like the cost of materials, because everyone had to buy their own individual stuff rather than being able to come to class and work with 4 other people. And so I think that's a part of it, but also I'm in a lot of performance classes. Well, I was in high school, and I am in the CSM chamber choir now, and I think being in person and being able to like create art with people in a face-to-face setting rather than through a screen, it's really hard to rehearse that way, and there's always the time delays. So being able to create beautiful music or a piece of theater in a space with others is certainly something you can't replicate over Zoom, even though you can, but you really can't. It's odd. But with like lecture classes and different like math and lecture and things like that, I think online is a good format for that. But for me, I'd rather take everything in person if I could.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here today. We're going to take a quick short break, and when we return, we'll be joined by student counselor Kellie Jamison. Thank you again.
Being in a hurry can be costly. In Maryland, a car is stolen every 40 minutes. Your car could be next. 50% of vehicles stolen in Maryland have the keys inside of them. Slow down, make sure to take your keys with you, and lock your car.
This message sponsored by the Maryland State Police, the Maryland Vehicle Theft Prevention Council, and the Maryland D.C. Anti-Car Theft Committee.
Welcome back. I'm joined now by Kellie Jamison, licensed clinical social worker and student counselor at CSM La Plata. In our previous segment, we spoke with students about their heightened stress and anxiety levels during the pandemic. Kellie, did you experience heightened stress and anxiety during the pandemic?
First of all, I want to say thank you for having me, Heather. It's wonderful to be here. And so if we're speaking about our students, I most certainly did. There was a lot of change and adjustment over these last 2 academic years for our students. And it caused us all to have to pivot, kind of like from one day to the next. I was here on a Wednesday, I guess it was, and then, hey, you won't be back for maybe a couple of weeks, who knows how long, but it caused us all to have to, pivot. And that was evident in our students' need to adjust and to transition to what they were used to what we were doing at that time.
And so how did you find working virtually?
So if I have to be totally honest, I had a little bit of a head start. I had already kind of been doing some virtual sessions independently of CSM on my own. So I was a little more comfortable than some who had to go to that format, on the fly. But I totally, as a counselor, it's not my favorite way to practice because we really are about energy and there's the visual of being in the room with our clients and kind of seeing how they come in, their body language and how they respond to our questions and our interaction. So it was definitely an adjustment. But I think compared to having no way to continue to provide this valuable service to students and to clients, like we were able to make that adjustment.
So now, given the circumstances with virtual learning and having to work virtually, what did you find that your biggest hurdle was with doing your job and counseling students with a screen between you instead of in person?
Yeah. So the adjustment wasn't so much for me as it was for the students. And so students had to kind of get used to the idea of being on camera in that format, and obviously that's not mandatory. It's not required that you be on camera, but in a counseling session it's just a little better to be able to see facial expressions and to see an individual while you're talking. So I did notice over the course of the pandemic that a lot of students that would come in initially would be really uncomfortable having their camera on. And then as time would go on, the comfort level would grow, obviously, with building rapport with a counselor. And, we talk about, some really personal and private things in counseling. And so there's that dynamic, but then there's also this technology dynamic that we're using. But I did see some growth and, some adjustment to it. And I think students really found that in some cases it was a little better for them than coming in, to be on campus. Got really comfortable with it, got really comfortable with me, really comfortable with the process. And so I think overall it was a win-win for counseling services and for the students who took advantage of counseling over the pandemic.
Now, at the height of lockdowns, did you notice if there was a change in student morale?
I most definitely did. Honestly, at the beginning of working virtually over Zoom with our students, these sessions would be really so much about the change of it, and I'm not cut out for online classes. I need to be in person. I don't know how I'm ever going to do this. There was a lot of doubt initially. And so part of my job as counselor and cheerleader and encourager and supporter, was to really kind of help students to kind of reframe what they were thinking about this period of time and what it was requiring of them. Because honestly, you didn't have a choice. And the only other choice would mean, well, you could put your college, your academics on hold if you'd like for however long this is going to exist, right? So it's kind of like one of those, like, let's just try to get used to it. Let's try to figure out where your strengths are and where you do well in this kind of environment, and maybe work on those areas where you feel like you might be lacking. So there was definitely a shift from the beginning to, even now, still do some virtual sessions, where students really, I think, gave themselves an opportunity and a permission to, like, let's see if I can really do this and to get better and to take some of the emphasis off of dreading this, thing that I don't have any control over, and really figuring out how I can make this work, and really still be as strong as I can academically.
Now we're back in class, we're back on campus. It's almost, business as usual. Are you noticing a change in student behavior now that they're back on campus mostly?
That's a great question. This question came up in a departmental meeting yesterday. And I think a lot of us are kind of finding, like, I don't know, do students know that, we're kind of back on campus? Because, there's still not a lot of hustle and bustle, on the campus. But I do have students who are requesting more in-person sessions and, kind of inquiring about when I'm on campus. And so there is a change happening with that. But I think we might all need to do a better job of saying, hey, you can come on campus, there's offices open, counseling services is open, and just trying to get some of that on the campus energy back. And I think it's going to take some time. And honestly, this might go back to your initial question, where have students gotten comfortable with some of the remote, learning and these opportunities to kind of, it takes away the commute. It takes away, that lead-in time that you have to get to school. So I think we're going to have to kind of like shift our mindset back to on-campus classes and counseling and events and all of those things.
Now, with the changes that the pandemic brought, as far as virtual learning, and now we're back in person, CSM also brought another change to their classes. They shortened them into 7 weeks instead of 15 weeks. Have you noticed any change in your students' morale in regards to that?
Oh my gosh, have I? Well, counseling services held not one, but 2 programming sessions, and we titled them 7 Weeks Got You Weak. And we did find out that it was having a lot of students feeling overwhelmed and stressed out. We heard a lot of, I feel like I'm really just cranking out this work. Every time I finish an assignment, there's something due. And I don't know that our students, a lot of them, there's always a spectrum with everything, but I don't think a lot of our students were prepared for the demands of that kind of workload in that accelerated period of time. And so I would hear things like, oh my God, it's just aggressive, that's how a lot of students, defined it. And so I think where it's been really difficult for some, others have adjusted. I'm finding that over time, just like with virtual learning over the pandemic, students are realizing that I have to figure out how to make this work. It doesn't look like it's going away. Over each semester, fewer and fewer courses are being offered at the 15-week, and I don't know if it's fewer, but you're likely going to have a mix of 7-week and 15-week courses, in your schedule. And I think that it's just a part of this transition that we're in, the adjustment, the pivot that they've had to make, and hopefully students are getting a lot better at figuring out, like, how can I do this well? How can I succeed at this? And I think I'm seeing a lot more of that.
Well, one final thought before we go. I did want to ask if you have any tips or advice for students, whether it be virtual or in-person learning related.
I do. And the main thing that I would say is students, don't put so much pressure on yourself. You're putting so much pressure on yourself, and sometimes it's for perfection, sometimes it's to meet the expectations of, your parents or your family, and sometimes it's your own. And so what I'm really encouraging these days is less pressure. Aim to be consistent. Look at how you're managing your time and prioritizing your tasks and organizing things, and that'll help you to be less pressured. The pressure really only takes away from your focus and takes away from your energy. So while college is stressful, and it definitely can be for most students, change that pressure into really just focusing on doing your best in that moment, utilizing your resources and your supports, and really just giving yourself permission to just be the best student that you can be at most times.
Well, Kelly, I want to thank you for joining us today and for all your insightful information. We are going to take another short break, and when we return, we'll speak with Professors Erika Stevens and Beth Caruso.
Tragedy is likely to happen once a driver's attention shifts from the road. According to Maryland.gov, drivers that text and drive are 4 times more likely to get into accidents. Don't be that driver. Put your phone away. Visit stopdistractions.org or call 708-334-3058.
Welcome back. I'm joined now by Professor of Communications Erika Stevens and Assistant Professor of English Beth Caruso. Thank you both for being with us today. The Maryland State Department of Education published a study that showed 50% of teachers rated the effectiveness of remote learning between 1 and 3 on a 10-point scale. Professor Stevens, I'd like to start with you. How would you rate the effectiveness of remote learning?
Well, it just really depends on the student. For some students, it is something that is convenient. It's something that works for them. For other students, they're more of that type of individual that needs to be there, in an in-person situation. So I just really think it depends on the student.
What about you, Professor Caruso?
Yes, I agree with Professor Stevens. I think that there have been some benefits to remote learning and also some challenges based on the needs and preferences of individual students.
So did you notice an increase in late and missing assignments during virtual learning?
I did. That was definitely something I noticed, and I think it was something where from an instructional perspective, I was in a place where I wanted to grant, flexibility and things like that in terms of deadlines for students so that pressure wasn't, crushing them in such an unpredictable time that we've had.
And what about you, Professor Stevens?
I found myself also extending deadlines. And when I say extending deadlines, that initial deadline. So for the most part, maybe the assignment may have been due on, let's just say, Friday at 5 p.m. But I found myself actually extending that deadline out initially to please at least turn the assignments in before midnight.
Right.
Just to give them enough time.
And late is better than not at all.
Yeah.
Right? Because we can work with late, we can improve, we can give feedback. So just, keep going.
As we discussed with students and the counselor earlier, there was heightened stress and anxiety levels during the pandemic. Did either of you experience that? We'll start with you, Professor Caruso.
I certainly did. I am someone who can struggle sometimes with shifting and coping with change. But the students have been, so wonderful and encouraging, and I feel like it was something that I was able to overcome and really try to encourage my students to overcome as well.
And what about you, Professor Stevens?
It was a challenge, For me, my zone is that face-to-face setting. And it was a challenge, but as far as it goes for attempting to help curb that anxiety for the students, I definitely had to make sure that I was able to really try and find that midway point with making the adjustment.
So as a professor, from a teaching standpoint, what would you say your biggest hurdle was with virtual learning?
Making the students feel like we were really sitting across from each other face to face. I found myself at times, especially, at the beginning of it, I found myself at times staring through that little itty bitty camera, hoping, that they felt as if we were really in this classroom together. So just making them feel like, this is a face-to-face in-class situation. The majority of the classes that I taught during the pandemic, like I said, especially during that heightened part of it, were what we refer to as real-time courses. So those are courses where we meet at a specific time, on specific days. And so I just really, like I said, tried my best to make it feel as real as possible.
What about you, Beth?
So I really like what Professor Stevens said about the importance, the need to feel seen. I think that that's a part of human nature, and working with students, students want to feel seen. Students need to feel seen, when they're in the virtual learning environment and they're not face-to-face with their peers. And so something I tried to do was really have a strong presence whether that was, posting videos and really trying to let students know that their presence matters. And by doing that, I felt like it really helped engage them the best I could. So yes, that idea of needing to feel like we're not alone on the other side of the screen.
Definitely. That whole point of making the students feel like their existence matters.
Yes.
So now we've all returned back to class. It's not quite business as usual, but we're getting there. How has the experience been for you, Professor Caruso, returning back to the classroom?
I have loved it. I'm definitely an instructor who prefers the face-to-face mode. And it's been great just having that lively environment and being able to provide instant feedback to students. And it's just been great.
And what about you, Professor Stevens?
I feel like I'm right back in my zone. I explain to my students that, this is a two-way street. I pull on their energy, they pull on my energy, and it's just a really good feeling, being back in the classroom.
And again, now that we're back, have you noticed any disconnect with your students returning to the classroom?
What I've noticed is I've had several students to say, I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be back in the classroom. I've had a number of students to say that they missed that interaction. So I haven't really pinpointed a number of very obvious disconnects, not as of yet.
What about you, Professor Caruso?
Yeah, not too many. I would say anecdotally, I have had some students say jokingly to me, I couldn't find the motivation to get out of my pajamas this morning and drive to class, because perhaps they were used to being able to kind of log in from their, in their PJs from home. But for the most part, it's been, pretty optimistic. And maybe like a slight adjustment in terms of remembering what it's like to socialize with their peers and be in that setting, but overall, great.
Yeah, and the students who are coming back into the classroom are students who want to be back in the classroom.
Absolutely.
Because they still have that option of taking a real-time course. They still have that option of taking a hybrid course, and they still have that option of taking a web-based course.
Well, I want to thank you both for being with us today. It's been great having you. I would also like to thank everybody for joining us, and I hope that today's episode was enjoyable for you as it was for us, and I hope that you'll join us again on the next Community Dialogue.